She laughed and said, "You'll never be more than average in life." I walked away without saying anything. Months later, she sat across from me in a meeting and realized I was the one approving her contract and salary. "You know what your problem is?" She set her wine glass down like a judge dropping a gavel. "You'll never be more than average in life." She laughed after she said it. Not a nervous laugh. Not a slip of the tongue. Not the kind of thing that escapes a person mid-thought and makes them wince a second later. A full, easy, comfortable laugh. The kind you use when you're stating something so obvious it almost bores you. I didn't say a word. I didn't shift in my seat. I didn't let my face do anything. I just sat there across from her at that restaurant table while the ambient noise of clinking forks and quiet conversations filled the space between us like water filling a glass. And in that silence, something happened inside me. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Not the hot, unsteady feeling of someone who has just been publicly cut down and doesn't know what to do with their hands. Something quieter than all of those. Something that felt almost like clarity. Like a room you've been sitting in for 2 years, just had all the furniture rearranged in one sentence, and suddenly you could finally see the walls. I didn't know it in that moment. I couldn't have. But that sentence, that laugh, that casual, comfortable dismissal of everything I was quietly building. It was the last thing she would ever say to me with the upper hand. Here's what you need to understand about that moment before I tell you the rest of it. It wasn't said in private. It wasn't whispered at the end of a long argument when people say things they don't mean and immediately want to walk them back. It was said at dinner. Her curated table, her friends sitting 2 tables over and close enough to hear the volume of her voice, close enough to catch the shape of her smirk. I had been with her for 2 years. 2 years of believing, genuinely believing, that she was the one person who would eventually see what I was trying to build and decide it was worth betting on. 2 years of watching her slowly, carefully, almost surgically edit how she introduced me to people. "He works in tech," always vague, always present tense, never with direction. "He's still figuring things out," said once, at a party, to someone she was trying to impress, while I was standing close enough to hear every syllable. I let it slide. Every single time, I let it slide. I told myself she was just private, or just the kind of person who took a long time to fully commit to believing in someone, or just someone whose world operated on proof before faith. But that night, watching her laugh at what she'd just said, I finally understood that she wasn't any of those things. She just genuinely didn't believe I was going anywhere. And the part that stuck with me, the part that kept me awake later that night, wasn't the cruelty of it. It was the ease. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was just being honest about what she saw when she looked at me. And I didn't realize it then, not fully, but that moment changed everything. Not because it destroyed something, because it clarified something. Something I had been letting sit in the background of every conversation, every dinner, every quiet hour I spent working while she watched something on TV. Something I should have faced a long time ago. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 26. We had been together for almost exactly 2 years, decent on the surface, occasionally tense just underneath it. She came from money, not the obscene, flashy kind, but the settled, comfortable kind where failure has always had a net beneath it, and so she had never quite understood what it looked like to build something from nothing. I was working an operations role at a mid-sized tech company. Stable enough, decent salary, the kind of job that pays your rent and keeps your life organized but doesn't tell any interesting stories about you. Invisible, that's the word. We met at a friend's birthday gathering. She was standing near the window when I walked in, holding a glass of something dark red, wearing a blazer that fit like it had been made specifically for her. She was laughing at something someone said, and I remember thinking her laugh sounded effortless, like everything about her had been arranged by someone who paid close attention to details. I walked over because I've always been the kind of person who does that. I introduced myself. She tilted her head slightly, looked at me for just a moment longer than a first look usually lasts, and then the conversation started. It was good. Genuinely, surprisingly good. She didn't do small talk. She didn't ask what I did for a living like she was filling out a form. She asked what I was trying to do. There's a difference between those two questions. Most people ask the first one. She asked the second. And I told her. I was in operations, but that I'd been quietly working on something on the side. A process automation concept. Not a product yet. Just an idea with some scaffolding around it. She looked at me like that was interesting. Not impressed. Not blown away. Just genuinely interested, which at the time felt like more than enough. We exchanged numbers. 3 days later we had dinner. Then another. And somewhere in the third or fourth week, we stopped keeping track. The early months were good. I want to be honest about that. She was sharp and funny, and she pushed back on me in conversations in a way that I actually liked. She had opinions that weren't just borrowed from other people. She read things. She had taste. And for a while, for a genuine, real while, I felt like she saw something in me that matched the version of myself I was still working toward. That feeling lasted longer than it probably should have. Because somewhere around month 5, things started to shift. Small things first. She made a comment once about my apartment being charming, and the pause before the word charming lasted a half-second longer than it needed to. She mentioned once, in the middle of a completely unrelated conversation, that her last serious boyfriend had made partner at a law firm before he turned 30. Just filed it in like a fact. Like she was narrating a podcast episode, not comparing me to someone. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being insecure. Then the work thing started. I had been putting in extra hours on the side project every night for months. Not announcing it. Not broadcasting it to my friends or my family or the internet. Just building. Quietly, consistently, with a level of focus that surprised even me. She knew about it in a vague way. She knew I had a project. She thought of it roughly the way you think of someone's jogging habit. Nice to have, probably harmless, unlikely to matter. One night she came over and found me at my desk. Both monitors open, spreadsheets and architecture diagrams, and a half-dozen browser tabs with research papers she would have found incomprehensibly dull. Coffee going cold on the desk beside me. She looked at the screens, then at me, then back at the screens. "Is this still that thing?" she asked. I said yes. She made a sound. It wasn't quite a sigh. Wasn't quite a laugh. Something exactly in the middle of both of those. "You've been at this for what, 8 months now?" I told her closer to 10. She nodded slowly. The way someone nods when a number confirms something they had already decided. "And this becomes," she said. I told her I thought it could become a real product. A licensing model. A small team eventually, if the right metrics landed. She looked at me for a long moment. And then she said, "Okay." Just that word. One syllable. And the way she said it wasn't unkind. It wasn't even dismissive in any way that I could point to specifically. It was flat. The way a door sounds when it closes very gently, but very completely. I went back to my screen. She poured herself a drink and put on something on TV behind me. I didn't think about it too much in the moment, but I should have thought about it more. I didn't realize it then, but that, "okay," was actually the first version of what she'd say later at that dinner table. It was just quieter that time. The months moved forward. The project moved forward. I connected with a man named Victor somewhere around month 11 of my work. He was a former operations director who had gone independent and now spent his time advising early-stage companies on infrastructure and process design. We met at an industry networking event, got talking in a corner of the room for 40 minutes straight about automation gaps in mid-market business operations, and by the time the crowd had thinned, he had asked to see what I was building. I sent him the deck the next morning. He called me that afternoon. "This is more developed than I expected," he said. I remember sitting at my desk when I heard those words and feeling something settle inside my chest. Not pride exactly. Something quieter and more durable than pride. Like confirmation from someone whose opinion I actually trusted. We started meeting every 2 weeks after that. He was methodical. He didn't hype things. He didn't tell you something was good unless he believed it. And because of that, when he said something was worth pursuing, you believed him entirely. I didn't tell Claire much about Victor. Partly because I wasn't ready to explain what any of it might turn into. Partly because I had gotten quietly tired of talking about the project and watching her face stay neutral. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from sharing your excitement with someone who can't quite rise to meet it. You start editing yourself. You start leaving things out. Not out of deception, out of self-preservation. She noticed I'd gone quieter about it. She didn't ask why, and in the silence of that unasked question was, I think, the actual shape of where we were. The truest version of us. A person building something they believe in, and someone beside them who had already decided how it would end. The dinner happened on a Thursday night in late October. Her friend group had a semi-regular thing. A rotating table at a restaurant that did not put prices on the entrees because its clientele found that kind of transparency slightly gauche. She had been inviting me for months. I kept saying yes, then finding reasons to shift the plans. That Thursday, I went. 4 of her friends and one of their partners. The conversation was light and easy at first. Recent travel, A friend of a friend's wedding. A new restaurant someone had been to in the city. I was fine. I was more than fine, actually. I made a joke early in the dinner that landed cleanly, and one of her friends, a woman named Cassandra, laughed genuinely and said I was funnier than she expected. I remember looking around that table and thinking, this is okay. I can do this. This is fine. Then someone asked what I was working on lately. And before I could answer, she cut in. Not aggressively. No visible edge. The way you'd correct someone who'd gotten a detail wrong about a story they didn't need to know more of. He's in operations, she said. For a tech company. Technically accurate. Significantly incomplete. And the incompleteness wasn't accidental. I looked at her. She was already reaching for her wine glass. I let it go. The dinner moved forward. More wine. The conversation circled wider. And then maybe 40 minutes in, I was talking. I'm not entirely sure how it happened. Cassandra had asked to follow up about something I'd mentioned earlier. A door cracked open, and I walked through it without thinking too carefully about whether I should. I talked about the workflow system, about the gap in mid-market operations that nobody had cleanly addressed, about Victor and what he had said, about where I thought it could genuinely go. I wasn't performing. I wasn't making a speech. I was just talking the way you talk when you actually believe in something. When the belief is real enough that it doesn't need any polish. Cassandra was leaning in slightly. Her friend's partner, a quiet guy who hadn't said much all evening, asked a follow-up question that was actually smart. And then I noticed something. She had gotten very still beside me. Not tense. Not angry. Just still. The way a person goes still when something is happening that they didn't script and don't quite know how to redirect. And I noticed the look on her face. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even irritation, really. It was something more unsettling than either of those. It was the expression of someone who had already made up their mind about the ending of a story and was mildly annoyed to see it going off script. She set her wine glass down. And she said it. You know what your problem is? The table didn't go quiet immediately, but something shifted in the energy. You'll never be more than average in life. Half a second of silence. She laughed, lighter this time, like the laugh was the softener she was offering. I'm serious, she added. I say it with love. You're a dreamer, but you think too small. You always have. Cassandra's expression did something complicated. Her friend looked away. The partner who had just been asking me smart questions suddenly found the tablecloth very interesting. I sat completely still, and I made a decision in that stillness. Not to defend myself. Not to explain. Not to perform dignity while quietly falling apart inside. I just decided. I set my napkin on the table, stood up, said I needed some air, walked toward the exit at a pace that was measured and calm, and communicated nothing. And I did not go back. I stood outside the restaurant for about 3 minutes. Cold October air. City sounds. The faint feeling of my phone buzzing in my pocket. Probably her. Probably confused about what had just happened. I didn't look at it. I got in a cab. Went home. Put my coat on the hook by the door. Made myself a coffee I barely tasted. Opened my laptop. And I worked until 2 in the morning. Not because I was trying to prove something. Not as some dramatic act of defiance. Just because it was what I would have done anyway. And for the first time in months, I did it without the background hum of wondering what she thought about it. That background hum was just gone. And the silence it left was enormous. She called 3 times that night. Texted twice. The first text said, "Where did you go?" The second said, "That was supposed to be a joke. You're being dramatic." I read them both. I didn't respond that night. Or the next morning. When we finally spoke, 2 days later, she had moved through confused and come out the other side into something closer to irritated. She said I had embarrassed her in front of her friends by walking out. I asked her if she understood what she had said. She said she was just being honest with me. That she worried about me sometimes. That people who actually care about you are the ones who tell you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I listened to all of it. And when she finished, I said something I hadn't planned to say. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her I just thought that we hadn't been seeing each other clearly for a long time. Maybe since the beginning. She asked what that meant. I said I thought she had answered her own question at that dinner table. Long pause. The kind that has a decision in the middle of it. So that's it, she said. I said yes. She hung up. The next 90 days were the most productive of my life. I'm not saying that dramatically. I'm saying it as a factual account. When you remove the mental overhead of managing someone else's low-grade skepticism about who you are, something opens up inside you that you didn't realize had been partially closed. I didn't understand how much energy I had been spending on managing her quiet doubt until I was no longer spending it. It was like putting down a bag you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten it was there. The first thing Victor did in November was make 2 introductions. One to a product head at a mid-sized software firm looking to expand its infrastructure offerings. One to the co-founder of an operations consulting group that had been building internal tools in-house at significant cost and looking for a better solution. Both meetings went well. The second one went exceptionally well. By December, there was a letter of intent on the table. Not for the full product. For a pilot program. 3 months. Paid engagement. With a formal option to convert into a full licensing agreement if the performance metrics landed where we projected. I remember reading that email at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. with my coffee untouched beside me. I didn't jump up. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there for a moment and let it be real before it became the next thing I had to execute. I signed the agreement 2 weeks later. Gave notice at my operations job the week after that. My manager looked genuinely startled when I told her. She asked if I had something lined up. I said yes. She asked what. I told her I was going independent. She nodded slowly, processing it. Good for you, she said. 2 words. Simple. And they landed completely differently than those same 2 words sound from someone who's already decided you won't go anywhere. The pilot ran from January through March. It worked. It worked better than the initial projections by a margin that surprised even Victor. By the second month, the consulting group had already mentioned me to a sister company. By the end of the 3rd month, the licensing conversation had expanded well beyond its original scope. What was supposed to be a single paid pilot became the foundation of a formal partnership discussion. Victor and I walked into that final meeting together. He leaned close to me before the door opened and said, "You built the right thing. Don't oversell it." I nodded. We walked in. I didn't oversell it. We walked out with a contract. There's something I need to tell you before I tell you about the meeting. Because the part you're waiting for, the conference room, the door opening, the moment across the table, it doesn't carry what it carries without this. About 6 months before that October dinner, I learned something about her I hadn't expected. We were at her parents' house for a long weekend. A beautiful house. The kind that announces nothing about its own value because it assumes you already understand. Her father and I ended up alone in the kitchen one Saturday morning while she and her mother were somewhere else in the house talking about something. He was a decent man, quiet and measured in the way that people become when they've spent a lifetime watching things unfold and have stopped needing to comment on all of it. He asked me what I was working on. Genuinely. Not socially. I told him. He asked real questions. The kind that told me he had actually retained what I'd said the minute before instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. And then, at one point in the conversation, he said something that I have never fully stopped thinking about. He said, "She doesn't believe in things she can't already see the ending of." I assumed he was talking about something else. A project of his own. Some old business decision he was still turning over. But then he looked at me directly. The kind of look that means they know exactly what they're saying and they're choosing to say it to you specifically, and said, "Give her time." I didn't understand what he meant then. I thought about it for days afterward and couldn't quite get it to resolve into something clear. But I understand it now. She wasn't cruel. That's the thing I want to say, even after everything. She wasn't malicious. She was someone who had grown up in a world where outcomes were largely predictable, where your ceiling was visible from early on, where the people around you had already proven themselves before you met them. She didn't know how to hold an unproven variable. The uncertainty of it genuinely bothered her. And instead of sitting inside that discomfort, instead of learning to believe in a future she couldn't yet see the shape of, she resolved it the only way she knew how. She decided the outcome in advance. She filed me under average, closed the drawer, and moved on. She wasn't wrong about who I was in that specific moment. The version of me sitting at that restaurant table had not yet done the thing I was trying to do. That was real. But there is a difference, a permanent, meaningful, structural difference, between where a person currently is and where they are going. She only ever looked at where I was. She never looked at how I moved. The company I had partnered with, I'll refer to it as the firm, was going through a significant expansion in the spring. They were in the process of acquiring a smaller operations consulting group. They were restructuring 2 internal departments. And they were evaluating external vendors for an account management and client services contract. The vendor review process was formal. Proposals submitted and reviewed. Financials examined. A committee meeting to discuss the shortlisted vendor and approve the final contract terms, including the compensation structure for any embedded staff who would work directly within the firm's operations. I was on that committee, not because I had asked to be, because by the time that review process was scheduled, I was a formal operational partner with contractual authority over a defined piece of the firm's infrastructure. My role had grown, quietly, consistently, without announcement, and my voice in the room had grown alongside it. Victor came along as a strategic advisor, unofficially, but with full credibility in that room, which meant something. The five of us on the committee were sharp, fair-minded people, the kind of people who make decisions based on the work and not on anything else. That mattered to me. That mattered more than I'll get to later. I want to pause here for a moment, because I know what you're expecting the next section to be. You're expecting a cold walk-in, a quiet smirk, a slow turn of the tables. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter than that. And honestly, quieter is worse. The meeting was on a Tuesday morning in April. Conference room on the 8th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. That particular quality of spring light that makes a room look like someone has been very deliberate about everything in it. I arrived at 8:45, got a coffee from the station outside the room, pulled up the vendor summary on my tablet. Victor arrived a few minutes later, suit jacket, reading glasses, the expression of a man who has been in several thousand meetings and finds them genuinely interesting every time. "You read the vendor profile?" he asked. I said yes. "Account manager running the pitch is named Claire," he said. "Strong track record. Solid client retention numbers." I nodded once. Didn't say anything. Because 2 days before this meeting, I had opened the vendor profile as part of my standard pre-meeting preparation. And I had seen the name. I had seen the company name. I had seen her title, Senior Account Manager, 3 years with this firm, responsible for new business development. And I had made a deliberate, considered decision. I would prepare for this meeting exactly as I would prepare for any other meeting. No strategy, no agenda underneath the agenda. No preloaded response to whatever expression she wore when she walked in and recognized me. Just the work. Victor looked at me for a moment with the specific attention of someone who has known you long enough to read the gaps in what you say. "You know her?" he said. "We've met," I said. He didn't press it. At exactly 9:01, the conference room door opened. The vendor team came in. 3 people. She was in the middle. Same posture I remembered. Same measured, composed walk. Same effortless quality she'd always had. The kind that came from being someone who had always had a certain amount of certainty about the room they were walking into. She was already doing the professional scan as they entered. The one you do when you want to know within the first 4 seconds where the power sits. Her eyes moved across the table, past the CFO at the head, past the operations lead to my right, and then they reached me, and they stopped. 3 full seconds of absolute stillness. I watched it happen in real time. The recognition, the recalibration, the specific expression of someone who is holding 2 completely incompatible images of the same person and trying to figure out which one to trust. I didn't smile. I didn't do anything that could be read as an acknowledgement of the history between us. I just nodded. The way you nod at anyone when they walk into a room you're already sitting in. Professional. Neutral. Correct. She sat down across the table from me, and the meeting began. She was good. I want to say that clearly because it's the truth, and I'd rather be accurate than dramatic. She was polished and prepared, and she knew her numbers cold. She knew her client list. She knew the firm's recent expansion history and had positioned her proposal accordingly. For the first 15 minutes of the pitch, she owned the room, and I paid complete attention, because that's what the work required. But I noticed something as the pitch went on. Every time she made a point she felt strongly about, her eyes came to me, not to the CFO, not to the operations lead, to me, like she was checking my face for a signal after every sentence. Like she was uncertain, genuinely uncertain, for maybe the first time in a long time, about what she was actually dealing with. The Q&A started around the 20-minute mark. The CFO asked about scope and timeline. Clean answers. The operations lead asked about the embedded staffing model. Specifically, how the vendor structured compensation for embedded team members working directly within client operations. She walked through the proposed salary framework. Clearly, competently. And then the operations lead looked at me. I looked at the numbers on the sheet in front of me, and I saw something that wasn't wrong, but wasn't optimized either. The proposed mid-tier embedded role salary was calibrated to a general market benchmark, but our operational structure had non-standard complexity. The general benchmark would attract competent people. The right number would attract exceptional ones. I said so, not with any edge, not with any weight beyond the observation itself. I said the proposed range was well-researched but built for a standard market rate, and that the complexity of the embedded role at this firm warranted an adjusted number. I cited a specific figure. Then I said, We'd need final approval authority on the compensation structure, not just input. That should be written into the contract terms. The CFO nodded. Consistent with how we discussed structuring this engagement, he said. She made a note across the table. I watched her hand. It paused for just a moment over the paper before it moved. A half second. Maybe less. But I noticed it. We broke at the midpoint. 10 minutes. Coffee. The room dispersed. Victor drifted toward the window with his phone. 2 committee members stepped out to take calls. Her 2 colleagues gravitated toward the side table where the water and coffee were, which left her and me and the space between us. She walked over. Deliberately. She stopped about 2 feet away, which was the correct professional distance for a conversation that needed to stay professional. You look well, she said. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the effort behind the steadiness. The fraction of concentration it was taking to keep it level. I said thank you. I didn't know you were with this firm, she said. I told her things had changed considerably since we'd last spoken. She nodded. A pause that lasted long enough to be intentional. I should have, she started. And then she stopped herself. Not because she didn't know what she meant to say. I think she knew exactly what she meant to say. She stopped because she was standing in a conference room where I held formal approval authority over her contract. And she was smart enough to understand that there's no version of an apology in that context that doesn't also look like something calculated. There's no apology in a review meeting that doesn't create a question about why it's being offered now. So she recalibrated. This is a strong company, she said, meaning hers. I know, I said. The proposal was solid. She blinked, like she'd been waiting for something colder, something pointed, something that acknowledged the history between us in a way that she could respond to. And the flatness of a genuine professional compliment was, I think, harder to receive than anything sharp would have been. Victor appeared at my elbow. Ready to go back in? I said yes. We went back in. The deliberation after the pitch lasted 45 minutes. This is the part one need to be precise about, because I know what some people would have done with that moment. I know the version of this story where the person in my seat uses what they've built not just to move forward, but to move something backward, where they find a legitimate sounding reason buried in clean language to recommend against the vendor. Strategic misalignment. Cultural fit concerns. A clause in the contract that doesn't pass legal review. Nobody would have questioned it. I had the authority. I had the vocabulary. It would have been almost invisible. I want to be clear. I thought about it. Not with pleasure. Not as a plan. Just as a shape that existed in the room. Something available. Something I was choosing not to reach for. And I didn't reach for it. Not because I'm above that impulse, but because the proposal she had brought to that table was genuinely good. And I had built everything I'd built on one principle. Make decisions based on the work, not on the politics, not on the history, not on what the decision would say about me to anyone who knew the backstory. On the work. The moment I broke that principle, even once, even for an understandable reason, I became a smaller version of the thing I'd been trying to build. I wasn't going to do that for her. I wasn't going to let that dinner table moment cost me anything else. The CFO looked at me across the table. What's your read? He said. I told him the vendor was well qualified. The operational fit was strong. I had 2 things to flag. One structural change to the embedded salary framework, and one contract clause I wanted legal to review before we proceeded. Both were accepted without significant debate. The recommendation went through. Contract approved, pending legal clearance and the revised compensation provision. Her company would get the work. The embedded role would be salaried at the adjusted number I'd specified, which, I should mention, was higher than what she'd originally proposed. Not lower. Higher. Because the role warranted it. Because I had done the math, and the math didn't care about anything else. I took the elevator down alone after the meeting. Victor had gone ahead to get the car. Lobby. Marble floors. The particular mid-morning silence of a building that is full of people doing quiet things behind closed doors. She caught me near the entrance. She had come down quickly, ahead of her colleagues. Can I say something? She asked. I stopped. Turned. She looked like herself. Composed. Precise. The kind of person who never fully lets the surface come undone. But something around the edges was different. Something had shifted in the way she was holding herself. I said something to you once, she said. At a dinner. I waited. I've thought about it since then. I didn't say anything. I was wrong, she said. Not a performance. No long preamble. No list of reasons or qualifications. Just, I was wrong. Simple. Exactly as it needed to be said. I looked at her for a moment. I know, I said. Not coldly. Not triumphantly. Just honestly. The way you say something when it stopped requiring a response a long time ago. She held my gaze. For what it's worth, she said, the version of you that was just in that room, I don't think I ever actually saw you. I thought about her father in that kitchen. His voice, quiet and deliberate. She doesn't believe in things she can't already see the ending of. No, I said. You didn't. She started to say something else. I cut it off gently, not with impatience, with finality. Good luck with the contract, I said, and I walked out. The legal review cleared in 8 business days. The contract was formally signed the following Monday. Her company came aboard. She and I have been in the same building a handful of times since. We are professional. We are correct. We treat the shared history between us the way you treat something that doesn't belong in the room, by simply not bringing it in. I don't think about her the way I used to. Not with the complicated mixture of grief and respect that I carried through the first months after the breakup. Not even with the residual low-grade ache that takes longer to go away than people admit. I think about her the way you think about a turn in a road. Not the destination. Not the journey. Just the specific place where the road bent in a different direction. As in, that is where it turned. And if it hadn't turned there, if she hadn't said what she said, if I hadn't walked out, if the next morning hadn't begun with that specific silence full of nothing but forward motion, I might have kept going in the direction I'd been going. Stable, decent, invisible, and maybe I would have been fine. I might have been fine for a long time, but I wouldn't have been in that conference room. Not with Victor beside me. Not with the work I'd built speaking before I said a single word. There's one more thing. Because this story, at its real center, isn't about that meeting room. The meeting room is just where the math resolved. The actual story happened months before, at a kitchen table, at 2 in the morning, with the city quiet and my screens lit and the question sitting in front of me like an object I had to pick up and look at. What if she's right? I sat with that question for a long time that night. Not with fear. Not with the spiral of someone drowning. Just genuinely. Just honestly. What if the project goes nowhere? What if the introductions don't convert? What if the letter of intent becomes a polite rejection? What if I am exactly what she said I am? Average. Comfortable. Invisible. I sat with that question. And then I thought carefully about what the word average meant to her. And what it meant to me. She grew up in a world where your ceiling was largely inherited. Where ambition was demonstrated through existing credentials, existing connections, existing categories that other people could immediately verify. In that world, average meant failing to inherit the right things. It meant you hadn't already arrived. But in my world, average meant I hadn't gotten there yet. That's not the same thing. Those two definitions look identical from a distance. They are completely different up close. And I think that was the fundamental thing she never understood about me. She saw where I was. She measured it against her map. And the map said, average. But her map didn't have a legend for people who move. Not loudly. Not with announcements or press releases or the kind of trajectory you can see from across a room at a party. Just steadily, quietly, without stopping. Victor asked me once, early in our working relationship, what I was actually trying to build. Not the product. He knew the product. He meant underneath it. The thing that was actually driving it. I thought about it for a moment before I answered. I told him I wanted to be the person in the room who makes the call. Not the loudest person. Not the most visible one. Not the person with the biggest title or the most expensive suit. Just the one whose judgment matters. The one who built something real enough that when the decision comes around, they look at you and ask, what's your read? Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, then build like that. Everything else follows. I've thought about that sentence on a lot of early mornings. It doesn't arrive all at once, what you're trying to build. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send you a notification. It just, one day, you walk into a room. Someone across the table looks up, and you can see in their eyes that the story they had filed you under no longer fits. The category they placed you in doesn't match the person standing in front of them. And you don't say anything about it. You don't acknowledge it. You don't take even a single second to let it feel like a victory. You just sit down, open the folder, and do the job. Because the job is the whole point. The job was always the whole point. The rest of it, the meeting, the contract, the look on her face across the conference table, that was just the world catching up. She laughed and called me average. I walked out without a single word. Months later, she sat across from me in a conference room and realized that the man whose future she had already decided was the one holding the pen.